Cutting the binding channel on a carved top guitar can be kind of tricky because usually when routing it's nice to have a flat surface so you can just lay the body on the table and go at it. One way that you can get around this is building a jig like this. It essentially registers the body off of this flat surface, and then you have your binding cutter riding from the top. That way the carved top has space to go underneath the jig, yet it can still route at a constant level. And I'll show you how to do this in a second. It's a lot simpler to be binding a flat top guitar, or if you're binding the back on your guitar, you can simply put the router into a router table and use it just like any other router. As you can see here, I've already done the back binding ledge, and that turned out great with just a flat surface. Now, one thing to make certain is that your height is adjusted correctly. So just by looking underneath, you can check that this is done correctly, and then you can go at the task. And I'm going to show you just a bit of it, and then I'm actually going to turn off the camera and finish it up myself. Once you see one pass, it's not going to seem too terribly difficult. One thing to keep in mind though is always keep pressure close to the bit, so that your body is always registering flat on your flat surface. And once again, just like we did when we routed the body, you want to start at the tops and go down and then come into the tops. And here you can see the results, both my binding channels, bottom and top, and also notice that I've done a purfling channel. This is done in the exact same method that you did the binding channel. It just uses a different sized bearing and depth, obviously. For bending wood bindings, you're going to need a couple tools. This is a bending iron. You can actually make them with a barbecue lighter and a metal pipe, but I like the fact that this has that shape to it, and I'll talk more about why I like that versus a standard round pipe later. It can also be made with a blowtorch and putting the fire into the pipe and obviously putting a cap on it so you don't have flames coming out the end. Pretty much you just want a heated pipe. And here we have distilled water. Normal water works, but some wood will be colored by it. I just find that I like distilled water. Don't ask me why. The way that wood bending works is heat and water. So essentially what you're going to do is you're going to measure out where you need your curves on your guitar, on your stick of binding, and you're going to wet it down. For especially difficult woods, such as curly maple like this, it's sometimes a good idea to buy a product called Super Soft 2, and it's a product that's used for veneer work, but it also seeps into the wood, makes no permanent physical changes to it, and helps it bend. So all you're going to do is essentially you're going to heat the wood with the side of the iron, and once it gets hot you can start to feel it give. And essentially the way that you want to approach this is to heat and pull into the tighter curves. That's why I like the multi radius pieces instead of just a circular pipe, because you can keep it on the flatter parts, and as it heats, pull it into the tighter curves. For especially tight turns, you want a backer. I find that just a 1/4 inch wide measuring tape does fine, and you're essentially just going to hold the measuring tape to support the back while pulling from both sides like so to keep pressure, and that helps keep pressure on the outside of the wood so it doesn't blow out the back when you are bending. Remember that your water will evaporate off because of heat, so keep putting more distilled water on as you go. I'd suggest practicing on some pieces before you approach the actual project, because this is a learned skill. It's a difficult thing. This is why a lot of factories do not do wood binding. It's time consuming, it's slow, it's arduous, and you will crack pieces. So don't start with expensive binding. Expect to get it right the first time. Some easier woods like rosewoods, walnut, myrtle, holly are going to be better to start with than brittle woods like ebony, figured woods like curly koa or curly maple, and an especially difficult one is bloodwood. It wants absolutely no water. If you put water on bloodwood and try and bend it, it will crack on you. Don't ask me how I know that. Remember to check with your routes and on your body to see how you are coming along with your bends. Before we can actually glue up the binding, we need to put everything in place with some tape around the whole guitar body so that the binding comes to where it should, well, where the binding is going to go to. As you can see, it hangs over my center line by a little bit. We're going to need to trim this up on both sides before we can actually glue the binding. See, both sides hang over. For this, it's essential to use a sharp chisel. There's really no other way to get it good. And I like to keep the binding on the guitar so that I don't have to re-tape it every time. And what I can do is simply get a block or two, raise it up, and then a sharp chisel. If it hangs over a lot, I can nip it with some fret nippers up closer to the line, but as I get close to the line, take tiny bites off with the chisel. Perfectly 90 degrees, well, obviously I'm going to have another block here to keep it up, but perfectly 90 degrees up and down and left to right. One way to make sure that you're 90 degrees like so is in the back of the chisel. If it's well polished and sharpened, you'll be able to see the reflection of the part hanging out this direction. If you can make the line on the actual binding and the reflection perfectly straight, you'll have a 90-degree cut. To pre-bend your purflings before gluing up the binding, they're a lot simpler than the actual wood binding. They're made out of a very pliable material. I actually use maple center stripe, and then they call it fish paper. That's the black. It's a fiber type of composite, and it's only 60 thousandths thick, so I mean you can bend it quite easily without it doing anything. What I do to pre-bend my bindings is I simply wet them and slowly bend them into the shapes and tape them as I go. And in a place like the waist, I'll pull out like this as I bring it in to overbend it a little bit, and then I'll tape it up. And when the water that I've put on these dries, it'll sort of lock in the shape. But I mean, bindings are so purflings are so pliable that they don't have to be a perfect bend, because the tape will easily keep them in place and they won't cause problems when you're doing your glue up. In preparation for binding, we're going to perfect these binding ledges with a small file. The binding cutter does a pretty good job, but it doesn't always do it perfect. So just bring around your file, and I've flattened one of these edges so that it doesn't cut into the body when I'm filing. And just go around and perfect the ledges. Just give them a nice flattening. And go all the way around the body with both the binding ledge and the purfling ledge.